Good afternoon. Welcome to our weekly livestock market update. I'm Brownfield anchor reporter Megan Grebner. With us is University of Missouri livestock market analyst Scott Brown. Good afternoon, Scott.
Good afternoon, Megan.
Plenty of reports to get into this Friday as we head into a long Memorial Day weekend. Let's get started first and talk about what happened this week in the markets.
Yeah, if we start this week, number one, I always say it was a pretty quiet week in markets when you look overall. If we start on the hog side of the equation, cash hog markets this week were up about 50 cents. When you look at that current lean hog futures contract that traded this week, it was really virtually unchanged for the week. So not a lot of action in terms of hog prices. The pork cutout value actually gained nearly $1 this week. Despite what were some lower rib prices, we got a little strength on the belly side that I think was helpful for us this week. I continue to remind us now, although we got strength in that pork cutout value relative to where we were a year ago at this time, we're over 16% below. So we keep seeing some modest increase seasonally that we'd expect, but just not the same kind of pop in prices that we got last year in terms of those wholesale pork prices. On the cattle side, live cattle this week down $2, while we saw feeder cattle 4 to 10 higher this week. So some strength in terms of feeder cattle prices, and even that current feeder cattle contract on the futures market was up about $4.50 as well, while live cattle futures current contract was basically unchanged this week. Looking at the box beef value for choice beef, it was down a little more than $2 this week, and we really saw a lot of weakness across the board on the beef side as well. And just like we talk about on the pork side, we now have that choice box beef price that's nearly 7% below a year ago levels. So we're not getting the same kind of pop on the beef side that we saw last year as well.
It's been really interesting to follow those numbers this week because up until recent weeks, there's been really some decent support and some positive moves on the beef cutout value. And this week, it's really taken more a negative turn.
Yeah, I still think when you look at what we have going on, the demand side of this is not so bad. It's frankly just what's been happening in terms of just the sheer increase in supplies and at what price do we clear those markets, and that's where I think we've been trailing on those wholesale values for much of this year.
Early in the week, we had that big, I guess let's call it China news or China rumor mill that trade issues and those trade issues were getting resolved, or maybe that there was more light at the end of the tunnel towards that. I think the beef market took that and embraced that a lot more than the pork side of things did.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there was a lot of question about whether those pork tariffs were actually going to change, not change, as being a little different as we negotiated with the Chinese. But again, I hope we get in a situation where we can put that all in the rearview mirror in terms of potential additional tariffs on our products going to China, because we certainly need to do that just with the sheer increase in meat supplies that we continue to see this year.
Scott, there's a lot of reports for us to talk about. Let's start first. Cold storage came out on Tuesday, and some interesting numbers, but I think the most interesting one is probably that pork belly stock number.
Yeah, absolutely. We can start there. So number one, a lot of news that I think has been generated with that 93% higher pork belly inventory relative to a year ago. That certainly gets folks' attention. We came in at roughly 65 million pounds of pork belly stocks. I just remind you that I think it's really 2017 that sticks out there in that comparison, with 2017 being so tight in terms of pork belly stocks. 65 million pounds that we got out of the report this week, to me, is really getting us back to more normal levels of pork belly supplies and freezers. So we'll see how that continues as we move forward, but we don't want to forget just how tight 2017 was. But yes, we talked about more stocks generally across the board of red meats. That boneless beef inventory at nearly 439 million pounds. That's 4.6% higher than a year ago. Nothing in the report that got my attention as being overly bearish in terms of where we are, but it just reminds us that as we grow meat supplies in this country, we're likely going to see more freezer supplies. Let's just hope we don't get in a situation where we're talking about, double-digit growth in overall red meat supplies in freezers as we go forward this year.
We know the increased freezer supplies or the increased amount of stocks can add some pressure to prices on the producers, or pressure to profitability on the producer side of things. But can it maybe help on the retail side, and then in turn maybe increase demand, those types of that type of circle of markets?
So perhaps, so I think generally I always look right away at, are we somehow building inventories that we otherwise wouldn't have because demand can't keep up? And when I look at where we are right now, I can't answer that's really much of an issue that we face today. Being able to help maybe a little more with the orderly marketing of those products by keeping some stocks in freezers at times is not a bad strategy for the industry to be following. So, well, it does give us an opportunity to stretch things out. The old sell it or smell it that we get all the time. It gives us a little bit of help there in terms of stretching things out. It's just hard to keep too much inventory in freezers.
Livestock slaughter report also came out this week. Let's walk through that report and some of the interesting figures and how it impacts producers.
Yeah, so I think I'll start on the hog weight side of this equation. So we came in at 215 pounds for April of this year. That's the highest level since February of 2015. So a real change in weights has been underway as the April number. That's 9 consecutive months of being above a year ago level in terms of hog weights. All of a sudden you put more hog slaughter and you add more hog weights, you get the combination of those two adding even more to overall pork production growth. A little bit of perspective, we had 29 straight months prior to this 9-month run where weights were down. So we were actually helping offset the growth in hog slaughter during part of that time with the 29 consecutive lower months. So it's a very, very different story that we see on that livestock slaughter side. I guess on the cattle side, I really start with, if you look at beef cow slaughter, year-to-date beef cow slaughter up nearly 12% for the first 4 months again of this year relative to a year ago. Starting to tell me that some of the growth in beef cow inventory may be slowing given that increase in slaughter. Even more maybe impressive at this point. So when you look at overall cattle slaughter, we're up 3.4% on the year thus far. Yet when you look at steer slaughter, we're actually below year-ago levels for the first 4 months, down 0.1%. Yet heifer slaughter being up 6.5% has helped carry that overall total cattle slaughter number higher. Again, reminds me with more heifers in the mix, we're probably suggesting some slowdown or perhaps we're done growing that beef cow herd. Now, I think that's a combination of economics and weather, by the way, that's driving that cow slaughter and heifer slaughter as well.
Is that something that we had anticipated this early to start seeing maybe the reduction and expansion of the beef herd?
So I think if you look back, we would have been saying, during 2018, we expect things to be slowing down. I don't know that we would have thought maybe things would have started quite this early. So perhaps some of the weather events that we're seeing, poor forage conditions in some places, have accelerated that to a certain extent. If you look at some of the regional data available to us on cow slaughter, it reminds me, if you look at the southeast part of the U.S., they're actually down 4.5% thus far in April of 18 relative to April of 17. So take states like Alabama, Florida, Georgia. They're actually down in cow slaughter, yet you look at Region 6, Arkansas, Louisiana, New Mexico, Oklahoma, Texas, up 7.9. You go to Region 7, Missouri, Kansas, Nebraska, they're setting at over 9% above for April this year relative to a year ago. So I see some weather things going on in that data that might have started us a little early in this slowdown and expansion.
Knowing what we know about supply issues already and maybe concerns about demand uncertainties with all of this negative trade rhetoric, is that better news for producers knowing that slowdown and expansion might be underway?
I do think we have to talk about getting supply growth in a better spot than maybe we've been here for a while. We've been growing very rapidly red meat supplies now for the last 3 years or so. And so being able to see that the spigot is starting to turn off, I think might be a little bit of good news longer term for cattle producers. However, that spigot being shut off at the beef cow side, it takes a couple years before the water ends up draining out of the end of the hose that we have on the other end. So we got a ways to go in terms of actually getting a reduction perhaps in slaughter numbers. So we're going to deal with more slaughter for a period of time. But again, it is nice to see us maybe starting to regulate that. And sometimes weather can be helpful to us in terms of the long run effects on beef production. So we'll wait and see, but certainly a change relative to where we've been for a while.
Scott, as we wrap things up today, cattle on feed report came out today, and really nothing that far out of pre-report expectations.
Yeah, that's right. So despite we're going to see the quick quip about this May being the second largest since we started the series back in 1996, nothing frankly really jumped out all that much to me when I looked at the numbers we got out here late morning. Placed on feed came in at 91.7 of a year ago. That was very near pre-report, a little above the average of the pre-report estimates, but certainly within the range. And again, on feed as of May 1st at 105.1, a little higher than pre-report that was at 104.8 on average. But we're really talking about those calves that we pulled forward because of very poor wheat pasture earlier this year. That has slowed down as well, and now we're talking about lower placements. I think it could set us up, late here in 2018 with a lot tighter cattle and beef supplies than we otherwise would have thought. And so there might be some opportunity here late in the year, given what we're doing with these last couple of reports, to be more optimistic about where cattle prices are late 2018.
Scott, as we look ahead to next week, what reports are we looking out for next week?
Yeah, so a little bit quieter. We're going to see a restaurant performance index report late next week, as well as we'll get a jobs report early on Friday next week. Those two demand indicators are what we're going to be keyed on next week in terms of reports.
Well, I will talk to you next Friday from Dallas, from the World Meat Congress, which is the first time it's been in the United States in about 20 years. It'll be interesting to see what they have to say, trade and demand, and the global market will be on the top list of priorities discussed next week. So plenty of information from there as well.
So perhaps I can ask the questions next week and you can give the answers, Megan.
We can switch roles a little bit, but I don't know if they want my analysis. You're the expert. Scott, good to see you this week. Have a great long weekend. We'll talk to you next Friday.
Very good, Megan.
So for a weekly livestock market update delivered to your email box every Saturday morning, visit our website, brownfieldagnews.com. You can click subscribe. You can also submit questions and comments if you have those as well. And for market updates twice daily, make sure to check out John Perkins' Market Minute. Have a great weekend. I'm Megan Grebner for Brownfield.